Welcome to Meath Libraries Summer Programme. We're Candlelit Tales. My name is Sorcha, this is Alan, and we're going to tell you some stories. And we're going to tell you some stories about a mythic Irish hero called Fionn Mac Cumhaill. When he was a young man, just kind of at that age where you're on the edge of being a man or being a boy, Fionn Mac Cumhaill was apprenticed to a poet, and he was sent out to travel the roads of Ireland and learn poetry. And there was a very important reason for this. You see, he had an enemy. Although he was a young man, it wasn't really his enemy. It was his father, Ull's enemy. Gull MacMorna, the one-eyed one, the leader of the Fianna. And you see, he knew that Fionn Mac Cumhaill's father, Ull, had been the leader of the Fianna. Gull had killed him and taken his place. And Gull knew that Ull had a son out there somewhere. And he was afraid. Deep down, he pretended he wasn't afraid, because he was a warrior. Warriors aren't afraid of anything. But deep down, he was afraid that one day the son of Ull would turn up and take the Fianna away from him, and he would be left with nothing, or worse, killed in revenge. And so, young Fionn Mac Cumhaill had been hunted all his life. But poets were protected. Even the captain of the Fianna couldn't kill a poet. And so young Fionn Mac Cumhaill was a poet. And he loved poetry. And he loved the songs, and he loved the stories, and he loved the sagas, and he lapped them all up, he learned them all. But he found that there wasn't always just the right story or poem or song to express just exactly what he was feeling at a particular moment. And so he started to try and make his own poems, but I'll put it this way, they weren't great. They were bad. See, he didn't know how to make a poem. He knew how to say a poem, but he didn't know how to create one. I mean, like, I could eat a cake, but I don't necessarily know how to make one. It's a different thing. I'm very good at eating cake. So Fionn asked his master if he could learn the secrets of making poems. And his master said to him, well, I don't know how to do that, but the greatest poet and the greatest maker of poems is a man named Finnaengus. And if you can find him, he might take you on. So Fionn Mac Cumhaill set off. Finnaengus had withdrawn recently. Well, in the last few years. Finnaengus used to be a celebrated poet, welcome in the hall of any king. But for almost 7 years now, he'd been living by himself in a tiny little mean hut on the banks of the River Shannon. And all he did, all day, every day, was fish. It wasn't that he liked fish particularly. In fact, after 7 years of very little to eat except fish, he was quite tired of them. But there was one fish in particular that he was trying to catch. A salmon. Beautiful salmon. Huge and rainbow-coloured scales on it. But this was a special salmon. This was a salmon that swam the waters of Ireland and could swim right into the other world, where it could eat the hazelnuts of knowledge and come back, and its shining, shimmering scales were full to the brim of knowledge. All the knowledge in the world, the answer to any question, was in this fish. And Finnaengus heard a prophecy that a man named Fionn would catch the fish and taste it and have all that knowledge for himself. So he started fishing, because his name was Finnaengus, and Finn and Fionn are close. Some people pronounce Fionn like Finn and Finn like Fionn, so he was close enough. He figured he'd give it a shot. But this salmon was too clever for fish hooks. He had to think of more and more elaborate ways to trap this fish, to trick it. So he'd become obsessed. He'd stopped caring about the halls of kings, he'd stopped caring about poems. All he wanted to do was catch this fish. And along came Fionn Mac Cumhaill. And he asked Finnaengus, will you teach me the secret of making poems? And Finnaengus said, go away, I'm fishing. Fionn said, all right, rude. But he didn't go away, he didn't go very far. Instead, he noticed Finnaengus spent all his day fishing and he didn't spend any time cleaning his house. And his house was kind of disgusting. So Fionn drew water from the river in buckets and he just took everything out and he scrubbed the whole thing down from top to bottom until at least it was clean. And then he washed all of the rugs and all of the blankets and all of the furnishings, except for one or two that were really nasty, and he just burned those. And then he put them back into the house. And then he lit a fire and he started to cook a nice little rabbit stew. And when Finnaengus came back from his long day's fishing, there was Fionn with a bowl of stew for him. And a beautiful clean house. Finnaengus said, Fionn stuck around. And every evening Finnaengus would come in grumbling, but with a belly full of something nice and hot that Fionn had cooked and a nice clean house. He started to grumble a little bit less. Started to say, so, what'd you say your name was? Fionn would go, alright, well, why are you here? Learning. Alright, I suppose, yeah, no, This is a secret, I suppose. Might, maybe, be able to teach someone like yourself. If you make, what was it you made last night? Was it venison? If you make a bit more venison now, we'll see. So Fionn stayed, and Finnaengus in the evening time started to teach him. Fionn was quite happy with this whole arrangement. And Finnaengus was getting stronger, standing up straighter. But it didn't last for very long, because one day Finnaengus came in a state of great excitement. I've got it! I've got it! I caught the salmon! I finally caught the salmon! And he handed the fish to Fionn Mac Cumhaill and he said, going for a nap. I'm going to go to sleep. I thought that was going to take maybe a few weeks. What year is it? And he wandered off. But Fionn cleaned out the fish, scraped off the shining rainbow scales, set it to cook over the fire. Now he knew that this salmon was important to Finnaengus. So he made sure that he was going to cook this fish perfectly, turning it on a spit so not a single bit of it burned, so that everything was even and beautiful and tender and flaky and full of flavour. And his stomach started to rumble, but he did not taste the salmon. Not one bite. Because this was Finnaengus' salmon, the one he'd worked so hard for. And as he was cooking and as he was turning the spit, this beautiful fish, he saw the side of it started to blister. It was really ugly. There's a big bubble of oil coming up under the skin. It looked horrible. It had put you off the whole fish. It was nasty looking. So he just carefully, just for the look of it, he burst it with his thumb and it burned. So he stuck it in his mouth to cool it down. And then when the fish was finished, he made a beautiful plate for the fish, and he laid it on a lovely plate, and he made sure that it looked just absolutely delicious, and he presented it to Finnaengus with great ceremony. And the old man took a bite of that beautiful flaky fish. Did you taste this fish? Fionn said, No, I would never. Finnaengus said, there's no knowledge in this fish. This is just a fish now. It's nothing. What did you do? So Fionn told him about the blister, told him about the thumb, told him about sticking it in his mouth to cool it down. And Finnaengus said, well, it's yours now. I suppose the prophecy was right after all, because a man called Finn caught it, and a man called Fionn is going to eat it, so it's not wrong, technically. Never trust a prophecy, young fella. They're awful things. You've got it now, you see. You've got all the knowledge in the world. And Fionn said, I don't feel like I have all the knowledge in the world. And Finnaengus said, it's because you burnt your thumb. Put your thumb in your mouth. Fionn did. It was like he grew to the size of a mountain and shrunk down to the size of an ant at the same time, and he could see the clouds, and he could see the sea, and he could see the forest, he could see the rivers, he could see everything in between, and all of it in a great churning cacophony, and he couldn't make sense of any of it. And he pulled his thumb out of his mouth, and he looked at Finnaengus and he said, I can't do anything with this. This is too much. Finnaengus said, you have to learn to focus. And so he taught Fionn how to use the power of the Salmon of Knowledge. And the two of them shared that beautifully cooked flaky fish because they weren't going to let it go to waste. He taught him that he had to focus his mind on a single thing. And so Fionn thought of the River Shannon, put his thumb in his mouth. And he saw it all, from its source to the shore, to the estuary, to where it went into the ocean. He saw all of the bends and twists of the river, all of the creatures inside it. Knew everything about the River Shannon in that moment, and then when he pulled his thumb, Finnaengus said, you have to focus it. You have to think of something that you want to know, something you want to understand, and then put your thumb in your mouth. So Fionn tried that. He thought of the river they were on, the Shannon. He put his finger in his mouth, his thumb even. Put his thumb in his mouth. Suddenly he knew everything about the river. Knew it from its source to its estuary, knew every creature, every fish that lived in it. Knew the river bed and the river waters and the way the sun shone on it. Knew everything about the River Shannon. And then he put his thumb out of his mouth. And he looked at Finnaengus. And he said, oh. Finnaengus said, well, never trust a prophecy. I suppose that one half came true. But Fionn stayed with Finnaengus a little while longer, just to make sure the old man was alright. Make sure he was set up. there were people still waiting in the halls of kings for the triumphant return of Finnaengus the poet. So Fionn wanted to make sure that he was properly fed up and taken care of before he went on to that. And then Fionn put his thumb in his mouth, focusing his mind on the question that he'd had ever since he was a little boy and he'd first learned the name of his father. He wanted to know where the Fianna were, and he saw them scattered. Some who'd followed his father long ago, hiding out in the woods, and some in the great hall of the High King of Tara. And he went to Tara that very same day, and he proved his worth, and the High King gave him the leadership of the Fianna. And how he did that is a story for another day. But when the High King gave Fionn Mac Cumhaill the leadership of the Fianna, Fionn looked at Gull MacMorna, the one-eyed man who'd killed his father, the man who'd hunted him all his life. And Gull looked back at Fionn, and Fionn could see all of the Fianna in the King's Hall, and all of the Fianna outside were watching him to see what their new leader would do. And there was a part of him that wanted to challenge Gull MacMorna to a fight and to kill him in revenge for the father he'd never known. But he paused for a moment and he thought about it. Some of these people had followed Gull MacMorna for as long as he'd been alive. They loved him, whatever his faults. He didn't want the first thing he did as their captain to be to kill someone they loved. So Fionn Mac Cumhaill reached out his hand to Gull MacMorna and said, "Will you follow me?" And Gull MacMorna looked at this young, fair-haired captain, and he nodded his head. He said, "I will." And he shook Fionn's hand. And with Gull MacMorna following him, and all of the Fianna gathered together again, a great cheer went up. And from that day, the Fianna became greater and more powerful than they ever had been before, with their leader, Fionn Mac Cumhaill.